This is the Unscripted Podcast. Today, we're just jumping right into it. Talking about the death penalty. Is it legal? Yes. Is it
Not everywhere.
all right? It's legal in the United States?
Not everywhere.
All right. So yeah, I guess that's up to the states. Is that right?
Yep, it's states' right.
Um,
Isn't it interesting we pick and choose?
yeah. Well, what I'm saying is it's the Supreme Court is giving the states the rights on that, so the people
That's
of
right.
that area can decide.
It's just like what they did with the abortion recently. And,
Yeah, and really, I mean, it gives more freedom to wherever you're at.
Yep.
If
You got to be careful about those things, though, you know?
you got to be careful about it all.
The difference between a democracy and a republic.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
What kind of explain that? Because I don't even know if I know the difference in a democracy and a republic.
So there's a famous saying, I mean, and nobody's ever really proven it, but there's a famous quote attributed to Ben Franklin as they come out of the Philadelphia Convention. The Philadelphia Convention is, of course, where, you know, the Confederation of the States, the colonies at the time, sat down and they're going to go through and they're going to write, as it were, our Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
And First Amendment, Second Amendment, you know, these things that we hold dear. And there was a lot of controversy over just writing a Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights, they were so worried that if they wrote a Bill of Rights, it would recognize a central government. You know, the what the Bill of Rights, you know, kind of outline. While their intentions were to maintain rights.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to maintain rights, you have to maintain the source.
The source that holds that those rights can be maintained.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so even the Bill of Rights was contentious in its historical writing. And as it were, you know, you had people from all different spectrums of politics, which was, you know, by design and healthy. You know, it's a healthy thing to have those. And so there's a famous saying attributed to Ben Franklin as he comes out of they come out of it, a lady asks him, "What have you given us?" And he says, "A republic,
Yeah.
if you can maintain it."
Yeah. Long live the republic.
And the difference in a republic and a democracy is that a democracy is, let's just say that enough people, so for example, popular vote, right? You know, we're thankful that we have the Electoral College because, you know, us in Mississippi, we wouldn't have hardly, I mean, we're one of the least populous states in the Union. We wouldn't hold any kind of sway, as it were, in any kind of any kind of election because they're not going to come here. And where are they going to campaign at? Jackson?
Right.
I mean, you know, I think Ocean Springs or Biloxi, one of those two, is the next biggest city.
Yeah. I mean, there's just sheer numbers. There's just not here.
Yeah. And so the difference in a democracy and a republic, of course, is a democracy is just a majority rules. So if we wanted to just decide in the majority that we want to outlaw Christianity, well, it's outlawed. Mm-hmm. Or locally.
Yeah, and that's those things. They go with the times. So if the majority believes this today, well then
slavery.
Yeah. There you go. So he's talking about. So we're giving you a republic,
and a republic is maintained by the consensus of the people, and with regards to the way that the whole process works, that there's a system of checks and balances.
And three big tiers of government.
Yeah, so that there's no centralized, you know, way that people can move at one progressive time.
Yeah.
And so that's why, you know, like I said, you know, you've probably read that quote before, but it's been quoted many, many times, but nobody can actually say that they heard or said, you know, Saul Franklin say that. But certainly the sentiment is true. Mm-hmm. And so what we've got then is, you know, this idea of I can't remember what year it was, and maybe you can look it up while I'm talking, but the Supreme Court, I think, handed this back to the states right around the same time that they handed Roe versus Wade as a you know, that they moved forward with Roe versus Wade. And so but the fact of the matter is that the death penalty was handed back to the states. And, you know, if let's roll backwards. You know, America has had a huge moral shift in the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. So if you were to roll backwards 20 years, which state would you think would have the most death penalty? How would I say this? What state would put the most people to death per capita in the Union in the year 2000?
Texas.
That's what everybody would say, but per capita is Virginia. It's overwhelming, the amount. And and ultimately, when they handed this back to states, do you remember they had the freeway shooter up and around D.C.? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that.
And I
really remember the sheriff, or whoever it was, that he was kind of the guy who was on TV all the time. There's a black sheriff that was doing a whole lot.
Yeah, and ultimately, if you remember, they were pushing to try him in Virginia because that way that they could try.
They could get him in the death penalty.
That's right, because in Maryland, where some of the shootings took place, there was no death penalty case. And so what they did was they tried him in Virginia for that reason, right? I always had kind of a, mixed feeling about that, right? And the reason why I kind of had this mixed feeling about it is that I'm not against the death penalty. I'm just going to make this statement. But I thought they were trying to use it for its convenience at that point. And
and it's, the death penalty now, you put somebody on death row and it's, years and years and years, and then all these appeals and all this kind of stuff. And
I read the stats, and I can't remember what it was, but it was something like 15 or 20 years, the average time that somebody spends on death row.
Yeah.
And so I can't remember what it was now. But the fact of the matter is that, I'm looking at this scenario, and I was thinking, we've now handed back, rightfully so. Really, it should not even be an option, but I'm glad that we're at least turning the corner to some degree where we've handed back to the states the ability to choose life or to take life, whether they're going to mandate or make abortions illegal. And I read a case a couple of weeks ago where a guy in South Carolina, during the pandemic, there was a supply chain issue, right? And it's still a supply chain issue in here. I don't know how it is when y'all go to the grocery store, but we still can't get everything like we used to before the whole COVID foolishness happened. But there was a guy in South Carolina, because of the pandemic, South Carolina reinstated the firing squad.
What? Wow.
And so there's a guy in South Carolina because they could not get all the juice, because it's it's like 3 or 4 things they use for lethal injection. It's not just like
I don't even know what all they use.
I don't know. I don't either, because I remember, we were taking, an animal we had come upon to the pound one time, and on the way home, Liam was asking me, "What is do you think anybody's going to want that old ugly mangy tomcat, Daddy?" And I said, "Well, no, but Mama wanted to carry us to the pound, so we're going to carry it to the pound." And he said, "Well, what are they going to do if nobody adopts it?" I said, "Well, they give him a shot, and
he goes to sleep.
He goes to sleep, and then he dies." And Liam says, "So it's kind of like a poison sleep shot?" And I was like, yes, it's a poison sleep shot." He's like, "Oh, okay, so poison sleep shot." So it's not that they give him a poison sleep shot. There's a concoction that they go through. Well, because of the lack of supply chain issues, chemicals and everything like that, South Carolina reinstated the firing squad. Now, the interesting thing about this is there's all these groups that advocate for fair or cruel and unusual punishment, right? So you can't just take somebody out with a tire iron, for their death penalty and beat them to death. That's cruel and unusual punishment. You can't just use, I think Utah was the last state to outlaw hanging, as a official death penalty source or whatever. But because of this guy said, "Okay, I want the firing squad," because you can choose, right? I want the firing squad. So he chose the firing squad for the reason that he thought that people would rally around him and saying that's a cruel and unusual thing that you're doing. Mm-hmm. You know, why would you? You know that we can't do that to somebody. You know, 7. You know the way they do a firing squad.
Yeah, you do. Well, I know the way that they I know the way that they would do a 21 gun salute, and I think that there's some properties that go along some of the same lines. You take like 7 guys, and they each get 3 rounds or something. I don't know, but
yeah, they all aim for the heart, and only one person's got a live round.
Ah, okay, yeah. So that way they don't know which one does it.
Yeah, everybody drive. I mean, everybody.
And none of those guys know which one actually shot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so they all aim for the heart. They all pull the trigger, and then. There you go.
One of them executed.
One of them executes it, right?
Yeah.
And so that way nobody ever really knows. So, that being said, this whole big stink comes up. You know, this is cruel and unusual to do that. You know, think of those poor guards. Think of those, you know, whatever. You know, nobody said anything about the guy that's been throwing the lever on the chair or the guy that's been pulling the doctor that's been, you know, administering the lethal injection to somebody. But because this becomes center stage, I think it's important that we probably talk about it. Is what does the Bible say about the death penalty, and what should our response be towards it? And you know, I have people, friends of mine that I really enjoy being with and being around that have said many times that they think that that's a horrible thing to do. You know, in England, it's not even legal at all.
Yeah, you were talking about looking something up, and I looked something up. It's death penalty history. I mean, it is unreal how much history and things are there. Just sin in general. When sin entered the world, we know that death entered the world. We know Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. When of course we're talking about eternal death in that spectrum. But I think about God was the one that issued a reckoning for life itself. And I'll just start with Genesis 9, and then I'll let you go where you were wanting to go. Genesis 9, when Noah came off the ark, God tells Noah, like, you shall, he's like, everything that moves, that lives, it's going to be food for you. I've given you all things, even as the green herbs. Just a little fun fact, up until this point, there's no record of man being able to eat meat prior to the flood. That he gave Adam and Eve the herbs to eat, and so you didn't have to, and the animals as well, like everything that was. So you didn't have to worry about T-Rex. The little lamb didn't have to worry about it. Neither did a lamb didn't have to worry about the lion. So they were vegetarians. Anyways, verse 4, but you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. Verse 5, surely for your lifeblood I will demand a reckoning. From the hand of every beast I will require it, and from the hand of a man. From the hand of every man's brother I will require the life of a man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man. And as for you, be fruitful, multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth, and multiply in it. And so this, this idea that
this was a new thing, eating meat.
Mm-hmm.
So God had to draw a distinct line.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's what you're seeing here, is that they're going to discover, and I don't know how many they went through before they figured out what was good and what was bad.
Yeah, Ben can't go, oh, I'm going to be a cannibal today and I'm going to eat a man.
Right.
And so I'm just going to take him like I took an animal.
I don't know if they started with the easy things to catch, birds or whatever, rabbits. I don't know. But God, I suppose that he knew that.
Taste testing.
Yeah, that we would taste test, right? And, it's like people will say, man, I really love bear. No, you really don't love bear. I mean, poor people eat bears.
Right.
I eat bear when we were growing up sometimes, and it is never good. The people that eat...
You just didn't know how to cook it right.
Right, exactly.
You know how to prepare it right. You had to prepare it like Granny did.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. And soak it for a month in turpentine.
Yeah, right. I mean, I enjoy eating deer, but I don't want to eat it every day.
No, it ain't got no flavor to it.
Right, don't have any fat in it.
Yeah, you got to have something like...
We like fat. We like bacon.
Well, I stopped on the side. It was right there before you turned...
Pork belly.
You come up by where Chip and Pam lived and turn right to go on Sunrise to go towards my house. There was a truck there yesterday selling meat, and I pulled over, and it was like a big box, like 8 ribeyes and all this and that and the other for $3.39.
Trying to cutthroat you.
And I looked at all them steaks, and I said, ain't no fat on these steaks. And a lady was sitting there, she's like, don't you want them without fat on them? I was like,
ma'am, have you looked at me?
I was thinking like, well, I don't want to down this dude's stuff, but like that steak ain't gonna taste like nothing.
Yeah,
there's just a but God,
ma'am, that rubber on that tire.
Yeah, exactly.
But what I love about this podcast is, we can be talking about things like the death penalty when we get on to eating steaks.
Right.
Yeah. All right, so so
where
God,
your treasure is, there where your heart be also.
Yes. So God he drew these lines, but what I love about it is God said, He didn't say I made Scruffy in the image of me. He said I'm in my image.
Yeah.
I created man. For in the image of God He made man, and that's how sacred that a man's life is.
Yeah, I mean, and so God wants us to understand. That's the principle that He's applying here. Mm-hmm. I saw a bulletin board one time. It was like, where do you draw the line? And it had like a chicken, and then a pig, and then a cow, and then it went all the way down the line to like a cat and a dog. And I was like, it depends on how hungry. You know what I mean? Seriously, like I'll go all the way to the end. I got no problem eating everything. I mean, they had horses and camel. I mean, every kind of little animal you could think of, and all these little sweet, tender ones that you would, see the little girl in the picture frame holding, And I was like, well, it depends on the situation, because if I'm hungry enough and we're starving for some reason, like I'll eat the very last one over here. I'll eat the cat.
Mm-hmm.
There's no limit I'm going to not draw to stay alive.
Yeah.
Right? Well, God says there is one limit, right? And what He does is He draws this picture at us. So
everything God created, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And so He created all these spiritual beings, but then He also created all these earthly beings. But there's only one that He created that had both spiritual and earthly properties, and that's man. And we're eternal. And so He said, if you're going to kill something that's going to live to be eternal. Now, I'm not saying that they're killing the soul, but you're killing the life of. That's what we understand too today. A Christian, you're the temple of the Holy Spirit. Don't look at those buildings that you're at. Like, our body's the temple of the Holy Spirit, and so, we need to take care of that body. And this is and so I have to be careful with those things, but also, like, life is so precious. It's precious to God, and so He was saying, I'm serious about this one. There's going to be a reckoning.
And so what he does then is he, in this verse 6, whoever sheds man's blood, by man's blood shall he be shed. It's not that instantly, you're not seeing an instant reckoning there. God will go on later on. There's a couple verses I wrote down here that when God brings Israel out of Egypt, He's going to give them this law. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about this before, that their law was intertwined with their nationality. So God's Old Testament law was just the same as our constitutional law. There wouldn't have been any difference there. There wasn't going to have they weren't going to have traffic laws or something like that. Mm-hmm. Every law God gave them for them to be a nation. And so, these are people that have been used to oppression, right? Slaves are never treated as like, first-class citizen, where right to due process, all this stuff that we enjoy today, a legal search and seizure. Like, tell me, when you would pull people over and you thought they had dope in their car or something like that, did you ask them, can I search your car?
At times, yeah. But there's process. Of course, I had a drug dog for a little while, and so that would give me probable cause to search a vehicle, regardless if they wanted it or not, because of the testimony of the dog and the dog's training. And
I don't understand. Like, I watch cops all the time, and these guys pull these, Methany over, and they're like, "Can I search your car?" And she's like, "Yeah." And then they find an 8 ball of dope, and you're like, "Why do you do that for?"
Yeah, because I thought if I told them, yeah, they could search, that they wouldn't search. Yeah,
no, like if they're asking you that. They're thinking there's dope in your car, right? They're not going to want to waste their time, right?
And lawfully they can't, unless you get permission or there's probable cause to do so.
Right, they smell marijuana, or the dogs.
Yeah, or they see something, that's there, and so.
Yeah, so God needed to put a due process system in, for the way that kind of things would happen. The way that the judiciary system would flow. Let's take a break, and we'll come back and we'll talk about that.
We've had several questions, and we want to take a moment to answer them and introduce ourselves to the community. One of them is, what makes our church special? Well, it's the people. The people here we are such a family, and we are a community of people that want to help each other grow stronger and overcome our obstacles. We want to invite you to join us and join our community of people in our family. We are located at 415 South 40th Avenue in Hattiesburg. Come connect with us and join.
This is the Unscripted Podcast.
So God had this way that he was going to kind of make sure that there was due process, and Jesus even, he kind of provides a commentary on that on the Sermon on the Mount, and he says,
an eye for an eye.
You've heard it said of old, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and
he's trying to change people's mindset.
Yeah, and that's why he says, when you say, you fool to your brother, he's showing the hatred that's in your heart,
right?
And he's saying that you've jumped over all the due process, you've jumped over all these things that God put in place, because sometimes things happen. Those things were always for the lawyers. And so that's why, like in Deuteronomy 19, let's look at a couple verses here.
And most of the time, God put these laws in, it was for their own benefit.
Well, yeah, I mean, they were all for their own benefit, and it was so he could specifically outline it, right?
Like if you're gonna touch a dead body, you need to take the ashes of a heifer and some water and some hyssop and go through all this. And he's giving them the process of soap.
Right.
Deuteronomy what?
19:15.
All right, go ahead.
One witness shall not rise against a man concerning any iniquity or any sin that he commits. By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall the matter be established. Okay? So God gives this, in Deuteronomy 17, there's going to have to be, I can't just say, I can't kill Ben and say Bob did it. Right? Because Ben's still dead. He doesn't have any voice. Deuteronomy 17:16. Let's see here. 17:6. Whoever is deserving of death shall be put to death on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. He shall not be put to death on the testimony of 1 witness. Mm-hmm. Well, why is that? Why is that in there for?
Yeah, I mean, you can get mad at somebody else and make up something false against them, and that was what thou shalt not bear false witness against your neighbor. That's what the original 10 Commandments was about. It wasn't about. Now, we don't advocate lying at all, for sure, but that was the context of it, is saying you don't need to bear false witness against your neighbor.
Yeah, God's going to take care of all these things.
Yeah.
If somebody's wronged you, he's going to take care of those things.
What was neat is if a false witness arises against any man to testify against him of the wrongdoing, both these men, they have in the controversy shall stand before the Lord, the priest, the judges, and then they're going to inquire. That's in 19. The judges shall make careful inquiry. And indeed, if the witness is false and he's testified falsely against him, then you should do to him as he thought to have done to his brother.
Yeah, right. So you reap
keep
what
from
you sow.
Conspiracy, yeah.
Right. So Exodus 21, now you get into specificity of it, right?
Exodus 21?
Exodus 21.
All right.
So Exodus 21 and beginning in about verse 12. So now we know that there must be a couple witnesses, right?
Yeah, and this is right after 10 Commandments. 10 Commandments is Exodus 20.
Yeah, I mean, that's right, exactly right. So, Numbers, no wonder it doesn't look right. Exodus 21 and read verse 12 there.
He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death.
All right, big picture, right?
However, if he did not lie in wait, but God delivered him in his hand, then I will appoint for you a place where he may flee.
Right, keep reading.
But if a man acts with premeditation against his neighbor, God's so smart, to kill him by treachery, you shall take him from my altar that he may die.
Keep reading.
And he who strikes his father or his mother, Those sneezes are brought to you by Ben Rickman.
That's right.
He who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. He who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand, shall surely be put to death. So you're going to kidnap somebody, human traffic somebody? 17, and he who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. You better watch your mouth, boy.
So there's several things here. You know, God does not, he doesn't condemn, so he doesn't condemn killing somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So like in verse 13, you know, there may be a situation where, you know,
there's a self-defense or there's a crime of passion or whatever.
Or you know what, you accidentally kill somebody.
Yeah, there's an accidental thing.
You know, farm accidents.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
I mean, how many of those do you hear about?
Oh,
right?
I worked a bunch of them.
Yeah.
They're horrible too.
Yeah, and because, you know, the person's got to deal with the tragedy afterwards. Or I worked with a guy whose car, I mean, he backed over his daughter.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you know, that's a terrible situation for a person to be in, but it was, you know, accidental.
Yeah,
right?
we worked a Mennonite farmer, had his little boy riding on the tractor, and kid falls off, you know, and boom, ate up by the farm machinery.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a horrible situation.
Super horrible.
And
so yeah, those accidents happen.
It's not killing.
Right.
Right? It's not death.
It's not murder.
Yeah, that God is after. It's murder.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You know, he's after the fact that something has happened. You know, you've struck him with, as if to strike with an iron, not only with an iron, right? It could be a rock or it could be a, you know, lead bullet today, right? Now, I understand that we don't fall under the old law. Let's make sure that's clear, right?
These are Old Testament principles. All we're doing is talking about the principle.
Yeah, we're just talking about the principle of it. And so we, of course, fall under the new law, right? So I think it's important that we then understand what the new law, as it were, would say about those things.
Yeah.
And so I thought we could look at a couple examples, right? You know, so by implication, like when we talked about self-defense, and Jesus told Peter to do what with the sword when he cut off Malchus's ear?
Yeah. Peter put it away. He who lives by the sword, they're going to die by the sword. If that's your leading thing in life. And we've referenced that podcast a couple times, and the powers that be in the data world or whatever, there were some big problems, and so that one still has not aired yet. So
yeah, it's coming.
It's coming. So there's a self-defense one that'll be coming out, or maybe it's aired by the time this one airs.
But the implication is that Peter, he tells him to put it away. He didn't say throw it away.
Yeah, put it away.
Yeah, there's a rightful place for your sword.
Yeah, he told him before that y'all need to take a sword. Well, we got two here. Well, that's enough.
Yeah.
And the idea was you're going to need it for some self-defense. There are some specific situations where you'll need the sword.
Right. And so let's turn to John chapter 8.
And on those couple of false witnesses, here's the amazing thing too, is you know, Jesus, there was a probability thing that how many people, Professor Peter Stoner was doing this, and they were coming up with a probability of how many people who would actually be accused falsely and to be put to death, but then would still be silent. That you think about that today, but you know, it was prophesied that, you know, that Christ would be silent. But you think so they were having an illegal trial for Jesus. Because they were doing it at night. They were also, you know, the whole
council wasn't convened.
Yeah, the whole council wasn't convened. They're bringing about these false witnesses about him, and so they're not even speaking truth, and so all these things. I mean, it was a mistrial.
That's right.
Because he's innocent.
Right.
But how many people do you know would go through all this? I mean, they'd be raised. That's what this guy with this death penalty thing was wanting to do. He was wanting a ruckus raised.
Right. And
so how many people would be silent? And then the other thing is, that's another show of Jesus' deity, is that he was getting the death penalty. He might not have said something, but you know his mama would.
Oh, that's right.
Hey, he's crazy.
Right.
Just just let him go. I know he said he's the Son of God, but just come on, little Jesus, you know.
Absolutely.
But no, she knew, and therefore she didn't say anything. So even though Jesus was falsely accused, and there may be somebody that you know who's being falsely accused that's in prison or whatever, so we get it. There's sometimes where people get it wrong, and I had I made sure that I could smack a home run in a court case before I was going to put something on a man. Whenever I was in law enforcement, because I knew the severity of, this is a man's freedom.
That's right.
And now we're looking at this as a man's life.
That's right. And so in John 8, what you see here. Now, I know we're still under the Old Testament period at this point, right? Because Jesus is talking in John 8. And this section of verses aren't in every,
every manuscript.
In every manuscript, but this scenario here is the woman caught in adultery.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And so they bring this lady to Jesus and...
In the temple, drag her in.
She's caught in adultery.
Right.
So by the Old Testament law, she was supposed to be
stoned.
And Jesus is teaching this really, kind of universal truth here, not about the death penalty, right? Mm-hmm. Because here's what he says you remember what he says to him?
To them or her?
To him, to them, to the crowd.
Yeah, he who's without sin cast the first stone.
Right. So what he's getting at there, though, is there's an acceptable time to cast the first stone by implication. Ecclesiastes 3.
Yeah, he didn't. Because they come to him, they're like, well, what do the law says for her to be sinned, but what do you say? And he's like, he didn't say, don't stone her, and he didn't say, do stone her. Mm-hmm. He didn't condemn either.
Right. He left it. He said, you guys have bypassed the judicial system again. Mm-hmm. Because you're seeking your own righteousness, right? And really, they're just trying to stump Jesus. They didn't care.
Yeah.
They were willing to do whatever they needed to do to this adulteress because in their eyes, she was condemned and dead anyways, right? But they had bypassed the process yet again that Jesus had, God over and over again had pointed to them about this. And that was a serious accusation against Israel throughout you pervert justice. All these things that God levies these accusations against Israel throughout their history. And so yet again, you're seeing this circumvent of justice here. Not that it was Jesus was saying, y'all need to let her go. We're not going to do that. And he didn't say that. Mm-hmm. He just says, let it here. Because in Ecclesiastes 3, there's to everything there's a season.
There's a time.
Right? And all there's a
time to kill.
Right, a time to take up stones and a time to lay down stones, a time to embrace and a time not to embrace. And so, you're seeing this idea that there's a time when we do this together. There's a time for the firing squad, right? That's what we're talking about here, right? The time to take up stones together is specifically and explicitly mentioned there in Ecclesiastes 3, that there's a time when we take up stones together. Now, what you're seeing here with Jesus and this woman at the caught in adultery is that you guys you've circumvented the process yet again, and you have no desire in mercy or justice, right? What you just want to do is catch me. So he asked this, kind of proverbial truth. Which one of you guys is sinless enough to do this? Really, Jesus is the only one that could do that. Mm-hmm. He's the only one that
could have thrown the stone.
Legally. But he didn't do it. And the reason why was because there was a justice process. And a justice process had to be upheld, and they circumvented this thing yet again. And it was, like I said, it was just to trap Jesus. It wasn't about, because they saw Jesus as this, portrayed himself societally as this compassionate person and all this and that and the other and so on and so forth. But, when the lady, he's writing in the dirt, however long that took. I don't know how long it took for him to write in the dirt for them to leave. But he writes in the dirt long enough for all the accusers to leave. And that's when he says,
where are they? Where's your accusers?
And that's why he could say, go your way and sin no more. Because it had to be by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that Jesus was letting her off the proverbial hook there and like, I'm going to just sweep your sins under the rug.
Yeah, right. You're okay, because God's no respecter of persons. There's no partiality.
That's right. But what he's saying is like,
the witnesses are not here.
There's nobody here to try you. I'm going to maintain God's system of justice, period. And it's going to be up to you now whether or not you can. You are not scot-free in the sense of you go do this again and somebody catches you, they carry you to the courts.
He said, "Go and sin no more."
Go and sin no more.
This is John 1. It talks about the law came through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. So they were coupled together. And so in that Sermon on the Mount, you've heard it said, "An eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth." But I say to you, whoever smacks you on one side of the cheek, you turn the other one to them. And then whoever compels you to go 1 mile, you go with them too. What Jesus is trying to do is he's trying to change our hearts.
Yes.
And he's trying to get this hatred out of our hearts. And the hatred that these guys had was for Jesus. And then they're trying to bring this woman who's caught in the act of something through the old law. He's trying to expel to them what grace is about. They had the truth, but their truth was in the wrong intentions. Just like you can read your Bible with the wrong intentions.
That's right.
I can go, oh, well, I'm reading my Bible today, so look at me. That's wrong attitude.
But if the witnesses would have taken that woman to the courts and tried her legitimately and stoned her, Jesus would have had nothing to say about it.
Nothing to say about it, because they would have been upholding the law that was the standard at the time.
That's exactly right. And so now that we can see that Jesus was not against the death penalty in the classic sense, or the judicial system, and we've talked about on this podcast before.
In Romans 13, he doesn't bear the sword in vain.
Yeah, so bear the sword. What is he doing with the sword, right?
Yeah, that's execution.
But now let's look at what Paul would say in Acts 25. Acts chapter 25.
This for those of you that, and some of you may just need a reminder, this is post resurrection of Jesus, post death, burial, and resurrection. So we're living under the gospel at this time.
Yeah, we're 20 plus years into the gospel at this point now. And so Acts chapter 25 and verses 10 and 11, Paul is on trial before Agrippa and Festus here. And so Paul knows that there's just no getting out of this thing. So he's going to appeal to Caesar, right? He wants to follow the judicial process. That's what Paul is doing. Mm-hmm. You remember in Acts 16 when they beat Paul openly, he says, "You beat me, a Roman citizen." You know what he's invoking? He's invoking his rights as a citizen of Rome, to not be beaten
by someone who's been taken over by Rome.
Yeah, exactly. And
that's one thing too, is that when they went to execute Jesus, they took him before Pilate because they said, us Jews, we can't execute the death penalty anymore.
That's right.
Because Rome's in charge.
And so Paul uses that kind of, I'm a Roman citizen. You guys can't do this to me.
Y'all can't do this to me.
Right. You beat me openly, a Roman citizen. Mm-hmm. And so what you're seeing here in Acts 25 is Paul said in verse number 10, "I stand at Caesar's judgment seat where I ought to be judged. To the Jews, I've done no wrong, as you very well know. For if I am an offender or have committed anything deserving of death, I do not object to dying. But if there is nothing in these things which these men accuse me, no one can deliver me to them. I appeal to Caesar." So what is Paul saying here then? He's saying that if I did something wrong in your law...
Yeah, and your law says that I should die. He says, if I've done something that's deserving of death, I do not object to dying.
And so ultimately what we're seeing here is this pattern created throughout this from the beginning, right? From the very beginning, God, when Cain kills Abel, God's telling him from the beginning, I know you're jealous right now because Abel's sacrifice was acceptable, but be real careful, Cain, because sin lies at the door.
Yeah, it always lies at the door.
And
you got a choice.
Well, then later on, he's going to draw this distinct line. Cain kills Abel, wrong. Murdering, wrong. When Noah steps off the ark,
God didn't kill Cain, but he sent him away. He became what, a vagabond? Isn't that what it's called?
Yeah, vagabond.
A wanderer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And everybody knew it.
Mm-hmm. He had a mark.
Yeah, and I've always wondered, was that just so that God, so God could work on replenishing the earth, or starting?
He has no place for that amongst his people.
Yeah, and so here you go. You see, this murder being wrong before Moses said, "Thou shalt not kill." Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, it was still wrong back then. You see the same theme throughout the New Testament, right? God kills actually God kills Ananias and Sapphira.
And he drops them right there.
In Acts chapter 5.
Yep.
And then Acts chapter 12, the Spirit kills Herod. Remember, he's eaten by worms from inside. So Herod's eaten by worms inside. Instantly, he's gone. And so you see this, some things are worthy of death in the New Testament. And so, and even Paul, looking at the law, not the spiritual law, but the judicial law or the, whatever, the law of the citizenry that he was under, when he is forced with that decision, these accusations, that's what they're after with Paul, is they just want to kill him.
Yeah.
Right. And so he says, I'll accept that if I've done something wrong.
Mm-hmm. And those are, and so he was accepting of the law. We also read where Paul was writing about, we need to be subject to the governing authorities. Mm-hmm. We see that throughout Scripture. And so whatever these laws are, some of them may be unfair. Mm-hmm. Some of them may not be right. Well, if you're adhering to God's laws, if you're punished, that's what Peter tells them. Peter tells the early church that if you're punished for doing good, then so you go to
1 Peter 3.
1 Peter chapter 2. 1 Peter. I'm going to 1 Peter 2.
That's what I meant.
There's some other ones probably, but servants, be submissive to your masters in all fear, not only to the good one and the gentle, but also to the harsh. Verse 19, for this is commendable if because of conscience toward God one endures grief, suffering wrongfully. What credit is it if when you are beaten for your faults you take it patiently? Like there's no credit for you. But when you do good and suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable before God. So just remember, he says, for to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us. So he left us the example. So you'll be listening to this podcast, you might be suffering wrong. You might be doing wrong. There's my great grandfather was murdered, and he owned a store, and convenience store, which would have been more like a market back in the day, and I guess like you'd see almost like the Waltons or something. But
General store, yeah.
He owned one. Well, he'd opened up on a Sunday morning, and my mama said whoever killed her granddaddy, she said that he knew him or he wasn't afraid of him, because the key was in the door. He'd unlocked it from the inside and left the key in the door. And it was almost like they were coming in to get something or whatever. And so she said the cash register was open and all the cash was in it. It wasn't a robbery. He was beaten by a crowbar. And his wallet was still in his pocket. So it wasn't a thief. There wasn't anything missing from the store. So like 50 years go by and it was a cold case murder. Like they didn't know what it was. Well, within the last 6 years, supposedly a guy made a deathbed confession on it. And he said that my great-grandfather, who was not a Christian, now this is the accusation, I don't know if it's true or not, that he had slept with this guy's wife, and he said, I killed him. And so you look at those things, and, there was, when you look at executions or whatever, but so whenever I was working in law enforcement, I could sympathize with people who had a family member who was murdered and they didn't know what had happened. And so I could empathize with them and sympathize. And so you might be listening to this podcast and you may be suffering wrongfully because you're doing right. You may be innocent. I don't know. But if you're innocent and you suffer the death penalty, God he'll make it righteous.
That's right. And we miss it very few times.
Mm-hmm.
Really and truly.
All the appeals, everything, yeah.
Yeah, we miss it. I'm saying we don't, when somebody, there are cases where people are tried and executed for something they didn't do. Mm-hmm. But that is a very small percentage of time that it happens. And so, hey, we hope that this has been informative to you. We hope that that we've covered our bases pretty good with this.
Yeah, well, if there's something we missed, you leave some comments in our comment section, and we welcome them if you got questions about it. Leave your question in the comment section.
Yeah, we appreciate it, guys.
This is the Unscripted Podcast.